Good morning. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good evening yesterday. You enjoyed, you relaxed, and you are fresh of energy and interested and keen to listen to the continuation of this conference. I will be back with some housekeeping just before the lunch break. Otherwise, we just run the morning with a coffee break and nothing special. But now I'm very happy to welcome Vincent Dale, the Director General for Labour Market Statistics at Statistics Canada and previously responsible for the LFS. And Vincent will chair the next session.
You can hear me now? Yes, okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Takes us all a bit of resetting in the morning, I suppose. So first of all, let me say thank you very much to ILO and Eurostat for convening this conference on such an important topic. Yesterday, we heard about the importance of supporting policy development with reliable and comparable statistics on new labor market phenomena, especially new forms of employment. In our first session, we heard about progress that's been made in conceptualizing new forms of employment, importantly situating that in the context of existing ILO standards and in broader discussions of the quality of employment. In the second session, we heard lots of interesting presentations on progress that different countries are making in implementing ICSI. And then finally, in the afternoon, we heard some potentially disturbing thoughts on the pace at which labor markets are changing, labor market practices, technology, AI, and the challenges that poses in terms of statistical measurement. So in the first session today, we're going to delve into what I consider to be one of the most challenging aspects of this domain, which is the statistical measurement of digital platform employment. So luckily, we have four excellent panelists who are going to talk us through some of the considerations and challenges involved in this statistical measurement challenge. So I'm going to start by introducing and asking to come up Michael Frosch from ILO. Michael has been a member of the Statistical Standards and Methods Unit at the Department of Statistics at ILO since 2016. He is the ILO focal point for the implementation of statistical standards on work relationships, and he also led the work developing the 21st ICLS resolution on the informal economy. Michael.
Thank you very much. You really want to dance when you're coming here, but let's do that later on tonight. Yes, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So in this presentation towards an improved statistical framework on digital platform employment, I will probably provide you with more questions than answers, but I think that says a lot of where we stand at the moment when it comes to digital platform employment. So there is little doubt that there is a strong need for statistics on digital platform work and employment. We really need to know, well, what is actually the prevalence of digital platform employment within countries and within regions, and how is this developing over time? But there's also a need for more detailed statistics, such as the characteristics of the people carrying out this type of work, the characteristics of the work and the working conditions. And in general, there is a strong need to have a more common understanding of the extent and situation of persons carrying out digital platform work. But there's also a need for data in order to understand how digital platform employment impacts on countries' labor markets. There is an ongoing policy discussion around a number of different essential issues, such as, well, does digital platform employment create new jobs, or is it rather a transformation of already existing ones? How does it impact on the flexibility and control over the work? How does it impact on the access to social protection, employment benefits? And how dependent are workers on digital platforms as a source of employment and income? And we really need statistics in order to shed light of these issues and other issues. And we also need data to facilitate this ongoing policy discussion. So due to this strong policy need for data, there is some countries and organizations that have engaged in this area and have measured different aspects of digital platform employment. And they have done this by using different concepts, different definitions, different statistical sources, and different methodology. And when we're looking at it globally, well, then we can see that there are still a lot of data gaps around the world. So a way to describe the current situation is that, well, at the moment, we have a limited and diverse landscape of statistics on digital platform employment. Very much, and the topic is very much characterized by the existence of several different terms, concepts, and definitions that all have different underlying objectives and boundaries and scopes. So this situation, it really hampers the possibility to have a fruitful discussion, and it also hampers the understanding of the statistics among users. But it also hampers the methodological development because, as was also mentioned yesterday, we really need to know what it is we want to measure before we can figure out how to measure it. Now, wrong one, there we go. Now, recently, if we're looking back the few years, there has been some important steps forward. There is the upcoming Eurostat ad hoc module that will be carried out next year in all EU countries in a harmonized way. And you will hear more about that later on in this session. And there's also the recently published OECD ILO Eurostat handbook on measuring digital platform employment and work. And this handbook, which you also will hear more about later on this session, so I will not go into the details, but this handbook is one important step forward because it do provide some input on a more harmonized take on statistics on digital platform employment, because it do provides some input on possible statistical definitions of digital platform work, and digital platform employment. And it also provides a kind of outline of a possible conceptual framework on digital platform work and digital platform employment, which is aligned to the other statistical labor standards, which we discussed yesterday. And this conceptual framework, it is a flexible framework. It allows or enables data collectors to focus on the different components that are of interest within the country. So these are all important steps that have been taken recently. But at the same time, it is also clear that this is an area where it's a strong need for further conceptual development. So starting with the most essential aspect, that is the definition of digital platform work and employment, well, then this has proved to be one of the more challenging aspects, actually. That is how to come up and how to construct a definition that is effective and that has clear boundaries, in order to guide countries in how to then operationalize the definition. So the definition in the handbook is an important step forward, but this definition still creates a number of different ambiguous cases, and this needs to be addressed. There's also a strong need to have a more thorough discussion around the different components in the framework in order to ensure that it actually meets the different needs for data. And in addition, there's also a need to have a more thorough discussion around the different indicators to recommend countries to produce once data has been collected. And not at least, there's also a strong need to have better recommendations for data collection, yes, in relation to household surveys, labor force surveys, but also in relation to other statistical sources which might be relevant for measuring digital platform employment or parts of it, such as specialized surveys, admin-based data, and maybe even big data. But household surveys, labor force surveys is likely to continue to be one important source, so we also need to be able to provide stronger recommendations in relation to that. And this, of course, needs to be built on the experiences already made. And there are a lot of important learning points that can be taken away from the different measurements that have already been done by using labor force survey in order to identify digital platform employment. And I wanted to highlight a few that relates to the different what we can call operational decisions that needs to be taken if a country, if a data collector wants to collect statistics on digital platform employment by the use of a labor force survey. So starting with the screening questions, so that would be the questions to use to identify these activities within the labor force survey. There we have seen some countries, particularly in the very beginning of this, using what we can call a minimalistic approach, that is using 1 or 2 questions to identify digital platform employment. This seems to generate a quite high degree of misunderstanding among respondents, which in its turn creates a relatively high degree of false positives and false negatives. So a different approach is instead to use several questions, which of course increases the response burden, but which also seems to capture a broader range of digital platform employment activities. Independent on the questions used, it's clear that there is a need to have a strategy to deal with false positives. And here, collecting the name of the digital platform is an important part of that, because it enables the data collector to assess the quality of the data and potentially clean data afterwards if needed. Some countries have taken this a step further, using predefined lists to match the name of the digital platform. Some countries find that very useful, others find it burdensome and challenging. And now more recently, some countries are also experimenting with using additional questions to test the boundaries of digital platform employment. Another important operational decision is the target population, that is to whom this question should be asked to. So in a labor force survey, it might be natural to ask the questions to the employed only, but there are evidence in countries that there might be a significant share of digital platform activities identified among the non-employed persons as well. So that would be an argument to ask the questions to all persons in working age. And finally, it's also an issue of the reference period. And here we see some countries is using a short reference period of a reference week, which has the advantage that, well, it makes it possible to link the indicators to other more traditional labor indicators, but it's problematic in a country if the prevalence of digital platform employment is low, and we do see that in quite a number of countries that have engaged in this measurement, that the prevalence is actually quite low. So that would be an argument to use a longer reference period, which increases the sample and therefore also increases the possibility for dissemination, but which in its turn might have some quality, create some quality issues. And then finally, it is a possibility to use mixed reference period, that is combining a short and a long reference period. So the point here is, first of all, that there are a lot of lessons learned that we can further build on. But at the same time, it's also clear that we need to be able to provide stronger recommendations for how countries, for how data collectors should think about these different operational decisions, because depending on how we decide in relation to these different issues, it will impact on the results of the measurement, and it will also impact on the possibility to compare data between countries. So this is something we need to work further on. So to summarize, there is a strong need for further conceptual and methodological development. And this need was discussed and raised at the last ICLS last year. And there the ILO received a very strong mandate to start up the work with developing a statistical guidelines on digital platform work and employment, with the objective to provide stronger definitions, a stronger conceptual framework, and better recommendations for data collection in order to better support countries in producing policy-relevant statistics in a more harmonized way. So that's one also very important objective. And these standards, they need to be flexible because they will need to meet the different policy need for data here. But they also need to be agile, and that's also going to be a challenge, because this is an area in which we would expect that there will be a rapid development in the very near future, and we need a guidelines that can take that development into account. So the goal is that these guidelines will be presented and discussed at the next ICLS in 2028. And to support that work, we will establish a working group, has already been mentioned, this year, consisting of countries from the different regions, organizations, as well as workers and employers representatives. And the work within this working group have to follow the ongoing work on the policy side very, very closely. It has to be a close link there because there's a lot of work going on the policy side. Within Europe, it is the EU directive, but also within the ILO, we have an upcoming standard setting process on decent work and the digital platform economy in 25-26. So it's important that there is a close collaboration between these two streams of work. So, well, very timely. I have 6 seconds left. So I started out saying that at the moment we have more questions than answers, but as you see in the near future, we will hopefully have more answers than questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me in the audience? Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Fabrice Mortain. Fabrice is a senior economist at the OECD, where he heads the research and modeling unit at the Center for Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunity. Fabrice's recent research has focused on well-being in the workplace, trust beyond GDP, and climate change. So, Fabrice.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce the handbook on measuring digital platform employment and work, which has been jointly written with a large number of partners, ILO, Eurostat, Eurofund, DG Employment, the GRC, 14 national statistical offices. AIN was a contributor. I can see some other contributors in the room. So really, this handbook was a collective achievement. Let me start by recalling that quality of employment is an important topic for the OECD and for my center, the Center of Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunities. We have published the guidelines on measuring quality of the working environment some years ago. They were then operationalized into concrete job strain indicators. I just published an academic paper recently. And we also offer to companies some employee well-being surveys for free. If you're interested to learn more about it, I invite you to talk to me after the session. The history of the handbook is quite long. It's really at the crossover of several agendas of a large number of institutions. So in practice, the OECD had this Future of Work project 6 years ago. The GRC implemented the well-known Column survey. ILO issued a resolution and created a new category of dependent contractors. Eurostat established a LAMAS task force. So at some point, all those institutions decided to join forces and to create a technical expert group in charge of completing this handbook. And as I said, there were also 14 national statistical offices involved into the drafting of this book. I can quickly describe the content of the book. So chapter 1 is simply an executive summary. Chapter 2, which was drafted mainly by colleagues from the Employment and Labour and Social Affairs Directorate, as well as by the GRC, lists a large number of policy issues that actually create the policy demand for such statistical work. We know that digital platform employment and work raise issues in terms of collective bargaining rights, fair pay, working time, mechanisms for dispute resolution, occupational safety, social responsibility of platforms, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, chapter 2 builds the case for the statistical agenda to address this, the problem of diverging measures and diverging concepts. Chapter 3 was drafted by Michael and his team, and with Ricardo and other contributors, we commented on this important chapter. This chapter actually lays out the conceptual framework for digital platform work with a focus on employment. It provides overall definitions of digital platforms and digital platform employment. I'm going to read it in the next slide. It also provides some useful information. I invite you to consult, for instance, the typology of digital platforms that this chapter contains. It's interesting. And there are a number of practical recommendations for statisticians. I'm going to say a few words about that in a few slides. So the general definition of digital platform employment, digital platform and digital platform employment are the following. Digital platform can be viewed as a digital service that enables the interaction between the provider and the receiver, or that directly engages a worker to provide a service for the platform. And the formal definition of digital platform employment that we came up with is any activity to produce goods and services for pay or profit carried out by persons through or on a digital platform or a phone app. And the digital platform or phone app controls and or organizes essential aspects of the activities. And this notion of control is actually the gray area that Michael mentioned in his preliminary comments. And the work is at least for 1 hour in the reference period. Then some colleagues from the Science and Technology Directorate provided some useful review of previous statistical initiatives. The key insights that we can draw from this chapter are that the terminology and the definitions are not harmonized. This is not really a surprise. Also, and perhaps more importantly, we don't think that there is an optimal statistical vehicle to capture all aspects of digital platform employment. So really, the various surveys should be viewed as fully complementary. So, for instance, we think that labor force surveys are the best vehicle to estimate the total number of digital platform workers, but to assess the characteristics or the nature of the task involved, some ad hoc surveys may be more appropriate, for instance. Finally, the last chapter, which was led by Ricardo, is very interesting because it reviews some important previous statistical experiments through a common template, through a common lens. So it really draws lessons from previous statistical attempts. So we cover labor force surveys, ICT use surveys, business surveys, tax registers, ad hoc surveys, and commercial data. Also, this is a chapter where the contributions from national statistical offices were numerous and of very high quality. So we send a common template to national statistical offices to inform the purpose of the analysis, the characteristics of the reference population and of the sample, and the implied operational definition of digital platform employment. And we also convey the key results and the lessons learned from these attempts. This is where also where we connected the conceptual framework laid out in the chapter 3 and the statistical experiments. So we proposed this tool, which I think is very useful to understand the scope of the various statistical surveys. And you can see immediately from this graph that the BLS survey in 2017 and the Eurostat pilot survey in 2022 differ in their objectives and scope. So a lot of information is actually summarized on this simple graph, and I invite statisticians to use this tool in the future. So you can see that the BLS survey focused on employment, on one type of production, services, on a type of status of in unemployment that excluded people employed by digital platforms. Unlike the Eurostat pilot survey, which also considered and included the trade of goods. Finally, we provide a number of general recommendations. It's of course important to connect with the concept that we described in the definition of digital platform employment. It's important to use filter questions, although this is not so easy. LFS should be the tool number one to measure the number of digital platform workers and employees. It's also important to document the frequency of digital platform employment during the reference week. Avoiding platform naming in introduction is advised, although it's also important to collect the name later on, as Michael emphasized. For business surveys, well, it's a good idea to align the definition of digital platform with that used by labor force surveys. To document the importance of DPE for business turnover. And it could be a good idea to update, actually, the ISIC classification. Finally, ad hoc surveys, such as the Column survey, are an important source of information. They should be routinely used. Finally, we also invite national statistical offices to draw more from big data and commercial data if some agreements can be set up with platform companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrice. Ricardo Gatto is our next speaker. Ricardo leads the EU LFS methodological team at Eurostat. And as such, Ricardo is responsible for the implementation of the international classification on the status of employment, as well as a module on digital platform employment. Ricardo?
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Fabrice, because that was the very interesting presentations and a perfect introduction for what I'm going to present now. That is, we started from the general ideas, concept, and then we are moving towards an actual implementation. And this is the Eurostat experience in measuring digital platform employment in our countries. So the background, this experience took place focusing on the LFS. So the theoretical aspects have been adopted accordingly, the framework of the labor force survey. That means consistency with the ICLS standard in terms of work and employment definitions. And also that is important to focus on the supply side of the labor market. So the providers, the actual workers. And also, we needed a framework that was feasible to be applied to a household survey, so to be implemented through a questionnaire to households. In practice, we had this 2022 pilot data collection that was on a voluntary basis. Still, 17 countries ran this pilot survey, of which 16 EU member states and one EFTA country that I think is also here present in this conference. But this was in view of preparing and refining the module on digital platform employment, the EU LFS module that is going to be implemented in 2026. So that's the main purpose. We hope to have data harmonized and as far as possible good quality data for that year. Definition adopted, okay, we for digital platform employment, employment is exactly the definition according with the ICLS standards, while a digital platform is defined in line with the handbook that Fabrice just presented. We tried as much as possible to work within the framework that the international community is building. And let's have a fast look at the results to understand what are we speaking about, what's the dimension of the phenomenon as measured in 2022. So among all 17 countries that ran the survey as a whole, 3% of the entire population experimented or performed at least 1 hour of work in digital platform employment, and to be didascalic, the right definition was they performed at least 1 hour of work in at least 1 week in the 12 months preceding the interview. So you can see the link with the ICLS definition of work, that is at least 1 hour of work in the reference week. But in order to enlarge the the sample, we decided to enlarge this to the last 12 months. So it's at least 1 hour of work in at least 1 week in the last 12 months. But looking and focusing on the employment, this share grows to 4.4% of the average employment or average total employment of 2022. Just to have a bit more insight into the data, we see that generally it's, there is a small prevalence of males in digital platform employment. There is a clear prevalence of medium-high level of education, blue and red bars versus the yellow one. And in absolute numbers, of course, adults are more present in digital employment, in digital platform employment, but when looking at a share of the population, there is a higher prevalence in the youth age with respect than the adult age. So let's try to focus now on which were the adopted definitions. For us, it was very important to distinguish the 3 agents that move on the market, and this is a particular kind of market because it's a market done by 3 agents and not the usual 2. So there is the provider, that is the supply side, there is the actual employed person, there is the client, that is the final users of the service or goods provided by the provider, and then there is the platform. That is an online service facilitating interaction between 2 or more distinct but interdependent sets of providers and clients who interacts through the service via the internet. It is rather a general definition of platform because we wanted to have the broader look as possible, with the possibility, of course, then to enter and to see the details of which kind of platform is. But we really were curious to understand the general situation. So the market is a triangular market with 3 agents, and it is very important for us that the 3 agents must be distinct. Maybe here this is a bit more precise, or we excluded all the situation in which 2 of the of the agent coincide in one point. So we excluded all the situation in which the platform and the client, for example, were the same. A client that asked through its own platform for a digital platform work. And we excluded also the situation in which the platform and the provider are the same agent, that is simply the provider has his own website to interact with the client. No, we wanted to focus on the triangular arrangement. So, in line with the EU LFS, we focus on the supply side. We focus on activities constituting employment, work for pay or profit, and we were counting people, not transaction, not volumes or revenue, because this is the LFS standard, and this was our goal. Main challenges. First of all, as Michael already said, we are very much interested in those who are detected as employed in the core LFS, and we want to understand how many of them they are also involved in digital platform employment. But we were searching also outside the boundaries of the LFS traditional employment, because there is several people that self-perceive themselves as not in employment, because digital platform employment may be perceived as not real employment, something small that when I answer to a questionnaire I don't focus on, but still they may have done paid work on a platform. So identification also of this second set, the yellow one, has been interesting. Of course, once they have been identified, theoretically we define them as employed, but of course we didn't include them in the core employment of the LFS because of the, if we have just one module, 1 year in which we will identify these people, it would be very strange to have a different definition of employment for 1 year in the labor force survey. So this will not affect in any way the core data collection of the LFS, but still this group will be investigated as an interesting one. The other main symmetrical challenge is the identification of false positive from one side, but also false negative on the other side. This second part is linked with what I was telling before, of people not self-perceiving as employed, but actually being employed, while the false positive are linked with the phenomenon we were saying yesterday, that people involved in digital platform employment knows very well they are involved, but the other may be mistakenly saying, yes, I use platform, I use the Teams every day, I use Skype. And that's why we suggest, and it is important to follow the suggestion that already Michael and Fabrice said, to ask for the name of the platform in order to be able to exclude all this false positive from the counting. We tried to identify several kinds of different kinds of DPE, but this is better described here in the graph, and you can see that transport is the main kind. Good sellings also is very well represented. The other are more or less on the same level, but not negligible. Particular cases. For example, we asked about renting accommodation, but in this case, it is necessary to clarify that this should not be just renting, should not be just a revenue from capital revenue, but it should involve actual work. So it is very important to clarify this in the questionnaire. Second, there is the case of practitioners that use platform to arrange their work with patients. There have been a lot of discussion because the perception was, oh, well, but they are just using the platform as an agenda. But then we realized that this is not just an agenda, because when the client search for a practitioner on the platform, the matching is done by the platform. The platform suggests, does a ranking. There is an algorithm behind. So anyway, the platform affects the work of the practitioners. So we included this in the group, and but we are able to identify this group in case in the analysis we want to exclude them. Food of delivery goods, this is the last important point, because there is a strong possibility to have underestimation of this number, because unfortunately a lot of people involved in food delivery, they are not in the reference population of the LFS, being immigrants, living not in private households. So this should be further studied. I think main lessons, I think I've already said. So I close here, and I thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Our next speaker is, Anne Polivka. Anne is a senior research economist in the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the U.S. Department of Labor, and directs a research team to improve BLS's labor force measures and to explore critical issues in labor economics. So Anne, please.
Thank you. I find the digital platform economy very exciting and interesting, and measuring it both fun but challenging. And what I'm going to talk about is, you've heard of sort of a more general discussion of platforms, but what I'm concentrating on here are labor platforms, platforms that involve employment. The handbook actually covers other types of work, an intermediated relationship where there is at least 3 parties, the worker, the platform, and the customer. There can actually be 4 parties, and external platforms. So that will exclude things where it's the platform of a company like Amazon Flex. Even with that more narrow definition, determining what to measure has some additional dimensions that you need to consider when you're obtaining an account of digital platform workers or setting up a standard. I've identified 9 questions we want to be aware of, 8 that I consider defining, and 1 more of a measurement. The answers to these questions may depend on the reason that you're measuring it, and I'll allude to that some, and where you want to be on the market spectrum, and a very broad spectrum of digital marketing place, versus an employer-employee relationship. If I have time, I'll also talk about some supplemental information you might want to collect, and categorizations of how countries have done it. So, the first question that one wants to address is, does the mode or location of work matter? Do you want to do platform work? As you can hear, it can be customer's physical location in person, or it can be virtual, completely online. And when you're making a definition, you may not want to make a distinction between the two. Or you may want to identify them both, but separately. Or you may want to concentrate just on in-person or just online. For example, if you're interested in local labor market effects or local labor laws, you might want to focus just on in-person. If you're interested in what effect AI might have on digital platform in the future, or what effect it might have on developing countries, you might want to focus in the online. So that's the first question. The second question is, how much labor services does there need to be involved in the transaction? And this is where you get into the aspects of how much of a marketplace do you want to measure versus how much of an employer-employee worker relationship. And this can be defined along a spectrum. You can think about measuring digital platform that only involves labor services, such as skilled healthcare or dog sitting or childcare. Or you might want to add in an asset like ride share, where you have a car. Or you might want to think, okay, I want to talk about selling goods where the worker has gotten them specifically to sell, or because they have made them themselves. And further down the labor services aspect are renting assets, where you do some maintenance and selling your own goods. And this is sort of basically a division between whether you want to include just services or whether you want to include goods. The next three questions are around how much control the platform will need to exhibit, which we heard reference to. And this will be around the worker-customer matching, the control of the price of workers' wages, and the control of access to the platform has with regards to the workers. So the first one of these is how much control does the platform have to exhibit over the worker-customer matching? It can be very minimal. It could be just basically an electronic newspaper where a worker just advertises on a board. That's essentially what's Angie's List in the US. Further up on the spectrum, it can be customers that post a job and workers will bid on it. This is somewhat how Upwork functions. Further along in terms of the platform control, the platform can maintain a list of tasks that the worker can do, and the worker can select them. That's like mTurk. Or it can provide a set of tasks which a worker has to accept within a time period. This is how food delivery apps often work in the US. And then you can get more even algorithmic matching. The least extreme of these is where the customer describes a job, and then the algorithm will look through the profiles that the worker has set up, and then offer a list to the employer or the customer that they can choose from. And the most extreme, where the platform has the most control, is an algorithmic assignment where neither the customer or the worker has any input into it, and that's what rideshare offer does. So that's one decision you have to make. Where do you want to be on that spectrum? Related to that is how much control does the platform have to exhibit over the price of the worker's wage? You know, does the worker set it, somewhat like on an Angie's List or a job posting? Or does the platform determine the price completely? Or is there something in between where the customer and the worker negotiate? The third aspect of control is how much control does the platform have over the worker's use? They can have extensive control. A worker has to maintain a minimum customer rating. They have to accept assignments as long as they have the app on. And somewhat related to that, the company can restrict the time that workers can access the platform. And this is what some platforms are doing in the US in states where they have minimum wage requirements. They're restricting access to the platform so when there is low labor demand. On the other end of the spectrum is minimal control. The worker just has to post legal work. So that's a decision one needs to make when one's defining questions, defining what it is to be a platform worker or set a standard. The next question is, does the type of customer or provider matter? Do you just want to measure peer-to-peer? Do you want to measure peer worker to a business? Do you want to measure business to business where you include self-employed in the business? Or do you want to think about these four-way relationships where, you know, it goes the business to the platform to the worker to the customer, and those sorts of relationships, which actually happens in food delivery in the US. So that's another question you want to consider. Then you want to think about how much commitment do you want to the individual have to work to be considered a platform worker. And this gets into the frequency of use. Is it enough that a person has just signed up to be a platform worker and never used it? Do you want them to have only used it once at some point? Do you want them to have used it once in the last year? Or once a month in the last year? Or several times a month? Or weekly? And related to that is, do you want to have a minimum number of hours when they do use it? Do you want to count as somebody as a platform worker who used the platform for 40 hours during a week 1 year ago? Do you want to count as a platform worker somebody who uses it for 1 hour every week, but that's all they do on the platform? Related to that is, does the proportion of a worker's earnings that they make from a platform matter? Should the measure include only those who earn more than a threshold amount of their earnings from platform work? And if so, what should the threshold be? 25%, 50%, 75%? And it should be noted, however, that if you do that, that you will actually skew your measure more toward low earners because it's easier to get a higher proportion of your earnings if you're a low earner. And then also, you want to know, should you get your platform earnings from one platform, or can you be from a myriad of platforms? And that actually relates to how dependent you think a worker might be on a platform. Do they use just one platform, or do you use multiple platforms? Do you use similar types of platforms? And then those are your sort of definitional questions. More of a measurement question, which we've heard a great deal of discussion about already, is what reference period should you use? Should you use a week? That will match many labor force surveys. Or should you use a longer reference period so that you can capture more intermittent work? Or do you want to have mixed measures? Do you have where you can have more than one reference period? You can both do weekly and annually, but then you then need to think about the burden and how you're going to ask those sorts of questions. So those are the defining questions. Does the mode or location of work matter? How much labor services needs to be involved? How much control does the platform need to have over the worker-customer matching? How much control does the platform need to have over the price or the worker's wage? How much control does the platform need to have over workers' access or use of the platform? Does the type of provider and customer matter? How intensively does the worker have to use the platform? And does the proportion of a worker's earnings from the platform work matter? Some supplemental information that you want to collect is the sufficiency of the work. How much time is spent searching for work? How often did you search but not find something that matched your skills, say on Upwork? Or how often do you have the app on with no assignments? You also might be interested in the reason that people are engaged in platform work. And this will be related, do you want it just on their main job? Do you want it on their second job? Is this a supplemental thing? Are you doing it to bridge yourself between unemployment, employment, and those sorts of things? And you also might want to know whether the worker uses more than one platform. This can be related to the dependency. As you've heard, measuring platform work in household survey is challenging. At BLS, we found that it was difficult to convey a common understanding of platform workers to respondents. And as you've also heard, you can end up with too broad a measure. What we did at BLS is we just had 4 questions initially, and our initial problem was those questions were actually too complex because we jammed too much into a single question, but also some of the attributes themselves were very ubiquitous. And there have been several approaches that have been taken to measuring platform workers in household surveys, where you actually, one approach is to ask about specific platforms. Sweden did this, or ask about a specific industry. This is what Singapore did, and you'll hear more about these various ways of doing this in the next session. You can ask about specific tasks. Did you deliver food? Were you an Uber driver? You can ask about specific attributes, and this is what we did at BLS. We asked in our 2023 whether you can be rated through the platform, whether you have to set up a profile, and whether customers pay through that. And we're, as Karen said yesterday, our airplane is still in flight, and we're fixing it. We're not even quite sure it's an airplane yet. It might still be a dirigible, but that's the approach we took. And then you can do a blend. You can ask about specific tasks, follow up by asking about attributes, and this is what Stats Canada did. Or you can ask about whether you engage in platform work, and if so, collect the name and then let AI code it up based on what you decide is or is not platform work. So thank you very much, and that's what I have to talk about.
Okay, thank you to all 4 of our panelists for an excellent overview of this very challenging measurement challenge. So I will open up for questions if there are any. I'm sure there are. Yes.
Yes, thank you for your presentations. I'm Leon Kustels from Statistics Netherlands. I had a question. I heard you all saying that you think the LFS is the best way to ask about digital platform employment. And a few months ago, I was at a conference where we also discussed platform work, and I heard a very interesting presentation from Jessie Gevaert, I think was her name, from the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. And what they did some research where they looked at what the best way was to approach platform workers. She also looked at the labor force survey, and her idea was that the labor force survey was not the best way to address these people, and that's mostly because what she found that it was mostly people that don't respond to the labor force survey. So I was wondering what your take is on this. How do we measure them if they don't want to respond in our labor force survey? So it's probably mostly a language thing, stuff like that.
Okay, do we have a volunteer to tackle that question first?
I mean, I do think we want a variety of ways to measure platform work. You can do it through a business survey. You can do it through big data with AI and those sorts of things. I mean, in the labor force surveys, I do think there is, you do want to convey a common concept. But you also want to do that if you're doing a business survey. You want to convey the correct concept. And I do think a variety of ways to approach it would be good because you get demographics, you get additional information out of the labor force survey. You get how it's affecting your employment rate, how it's potentially affecting, people of various educations. So it sort of depends on what your objective is and why you're doing it and why. Just do a variety of things and see where things come out. And did they say why they didn't, or did they say what they would use instead of a labor force survey?
What she did was, it's a bit. She just went into the streets here in Brussels, and she know the places where they would hang out. So she tackled a lot of I don't know what it's called here in Brussels. In the Netherlands, it's called thuisbezorgd, like eat away or something like that. The delivers her food. And that's how she tackled them. Not literally, but how she got them to answer the questions.
And that is if you really want to drill into that particular type of worker and what they're doing. Whereas if you want a representative estimate nationally, that won't give you that. Where a labor force survey. She
laid them next to the figures of the LFS, and she just saw that those people are not in the LFS figures. They're not in there. So how are you going to get them in there?
Michael, did I see that you had a...
Yeah, I mean, that's the general problem we also discussed yesterday. That is that the labor force survey might actually miss out on some specific people. But I very much, now I'm really trying to hold the microphone as we but it feels very strange. But I very much, I think that the starting point has to be that the different sources will be needed for different purposes. And I know within the ILO we have conducted different specialized surveys in order to get in-depth understanding of the situation of some very specific types of digital platform workers. And there, these kind of approaches are really effective. But then the first question is, well, what is the general prevalence in the country? How big share is this of the total employment? And then you need a different type of source. So I think it will be difficult to avoid labor force surveys, but we really need to figure out where are the strengths and where are the weaknesses, and how can we use different statistical sources in a complementary way. And for that, we need also stronger recommendations and think more about it, how it can been used in a complementary way. Yeah.
If I can add, this is exactly what we were analyzing in the 4th chapter of the handbook, the different sources and how they were able to catch the different aspect of the digital platform employment. And I think the conclusion was clear. If you need a general estimation of the dimension of the phenomenon, of the magnitude of the phenomenon, you cannot avoid the labor force survey. That is the only way to have harmonized and good information on the labor market. But of course, there is this withdrawal that I said before. There is a part of the people doing digital platform employment that does not belong to the reference population. And in this case, such kind of survey, ad hoc survey, they can be very useful to focus on this particular group. So no one says that there is only one possible source, but we cannot avoid LFS, and we should go in-depth analysis with other sources. I think the handbook was really good in dealing with this subject.
Okay, thank you. I see there's 2 more questions at least. So first over here, I think there's only one microphone, so it might take a moment to get to you. Maybe I'll just...
Thank you very much. I'm Daniel Kotzer. I'm the economist of ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation. And, we can see the complexity of the topic, and I'm going to add a couple of more questions to make it more complex. You know, I fully agree with this triangle of the relationship, which is amazing. But there is something that for us, our comrades, the people that we aspire to represent, that it's quite important. Questions about the interaction among workers and between workers through the platform economy. For us, it's very important to know, do you interact with colleagues without the supervision of somebody or the algorithm? Do you sometimes meet somebody in your workplace? Because those are the crucial information of something that we are suffering, you know, union busting from Amazon and many others. Well, not only platform, some of brick and mortar also shops, they bust unions. But this is something that is going to be important because it shows results very recently. For example, in the UK with these automatic car washing unions that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the employment relations. So for us, it's very important to know that. And I would plead or beg you that keep that in consideration because that's policy information that will be very crucial.
Okay. Thank you for the question. And you want to go first?
Yeah, I actually think interaction between workers is going to be a very important thing, not just for platform workers, but also for remote workers. And platform workers do have a variety of way of interacting. I ask my Uber driver every time I get in one, so what do you do? And, you know, and they do have meeting places, and they do have chat boards. And I agree, it is important to know about those kind of interactions, but I think more broadly even than just platform workers.
Michael and then Fabrice.
Yeah, I see Uma is raising her hand, so I will let her speak, but because I was going to refer to a report I just reviewed around platform workers in Uganda, it was. And there it was very, very clear that these kind of WhatsApp groups or different forums were essential for the platform workers. They were sharing experiences, lessons learned, problems they were facing. So this was really the forum in where they communicated and where they could change experience with each other. So it's a key aspect, I think. But Uma, feel free to complement.
Yeah, thanks. Fabrice, go ahead.
We just published a paper with Agnès Parent-Thirion from Eurostat on the job characteristics that are the most important to determine workers' health and well-being. And among those, the most important is the quality of social interactions at the workplace. Which can be positive when you receive social support from colleagues or managers, or negative when you're victim of intimidation or discrimination. So in a sense, the lack of social interactions for digital platform workers compared to normal workers, so to speak, is a negative aspect of the job. Whether it is compensated in the form of more autonomy, more freedom to self-organize, remains to be evaluated in kind of satisfaction surveys, and there are already a few of them available.
Okay, thank you. And Uma, I think you had your hand up for a question as well. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to pose more my question and my own reflections hearing this excellent panel. And it's good to see the handbook moving forward, on which I was also involved. Now, I think hearing Anna, and I think a part of my questions come from that. There are too many things we want to achieve using a labor force survey. And I think it might be good for us to be very clear, what do we want, and do it, break them down into different steps. If estimation is what you need, and I think the ad hoc surveys that many people, international organizations, academics have done, you have a very good listing of the kind of digital labor platforms that exist. And you can use that, and you can use the handbook definition, and I think we've advanced more with that, with what we mean by digital labor platform. Because Anna, the extensive and the minimalistic platforms that you show, for me at the one end, it's basically listings, classifieds. Those are not platforms. I think we can just pick the digital labor platforms, and here Ricardo's slide very nicely showed across the different occupations what they are. So we have a very good listing. And the second thing I think I would do using that is, in many developing countries, you have multiple jobs being captured in the labor force surveys. And we can use the same approach here, having multiple jobs, and use the same definition. Have you worked in the last week on a platform? So, you have systematically then collecting, whether you're talking about a traditional labor market or a platform employment, and then collect some of the characteristics, not everything under the umbrella, because you can't get all the control variables, you can't get algorithmic management and all of that. But at least then you get what is the incidence, which platforms are these workers working, and then you can tweak some of the questions that are there under control and management to include a parallel one for the platform. And I think that would be a much better approach rather than trying to bring in all the aspects that are there within just one module or within the labor force survey. And I think once we know, we can then go much more in depth in understanding what the implications are. But parallelly, I would also argue that it would be very important to get information from the platforms, make that data available. And this is something we've been arguing for more than 5 years. So I think it would be the two of them which would give us a good estimate as to what is it that we are talking about. Thanks.
Reactions? Ideas?
Yes, I agree. You probably don't want to measure all of those attributes. You want to pick some very key ones and concentrate on it. But there are things that you need to think about in terms of whether you're measuring a platform. And there are aggregators out there that will give you a vast name of platforms like, there's like Mashcash in Australia that I think you can get platform names from. And yes, you can, that I think will give you some good clues. Look at those, look at what attributes you want, but to really think about what you want. And I agree that getting data from the platforms themselves would be useful. You have to know what platforms you want, though, and you have to be very convincing because they're not very generous.
Okay.
Yeah,
Michael?
and just shortly to add, because I was very happy when I saw your slide, and on the different forms of control on this continuum, because personally I think this is a very underdeveloped part of the statistical side, that is these different forms of control that is impacting on the work. And I think that's key, that will be key for. Yes, we can agree probably in this room that there are certain digital platforms that absolutely should be included. There might be some digital tools that should be excluded. But at some point we will be on this boundary, and that's where it starts to become very, very difficult, and where people have very, very different views. But it can have a big impact on the end estimate. So we need to find some line here where to draw this line is essential, but it will be very, very difficult. But I think it was nice to see a bit more conceptualization around this compared to what I've seen before. And I think this is something we very much need to explore further. And yes, if we could access the data from the digital platforms, would be fantastic. That's the bizarre thing of this. It's the type of employment that generates most data, but we are struggling to produce data on it. But yeah.
The other thing I think one needs to be really aware of is that you want to have a durable measure. And it's a platform work is just changing so much. I mean, what we thought in 2017 is not actually the way customers pay for their platform work anymore. So if you had written something around specifically that and expected it to last, then you would have an issue. So it's very complicated, but it's a lot of fun.
Okay, I think we have Sylvain has a question, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I will continue on what the discussions have been going through, where it's been going through. What I understand from what I've seen so far is everything has been built around this triangular relationship in one job. But one thing that is happening is that there's a multiplications of platform and about multiplications of possibilities of working through platforms, which might have significant impact on how we measure them. I've had the chance, although it's anecdotal, to talk to platform workers that are using multiple platforms within 1 hour. So using labor force survey, have you worked in one platform in this triangular within the last hour might not apply. This person have been using more than one platform, which relates to what you were talking about. Is this the right approach to get in? Then we're going into the other discussions that Michael brought about and you brought about the level of control. They're using multiple platforms in order to pick what is most profitable for them. So they're becoming to be strategic users of this labor market of multiple platforms to maximize their time at work. And whether we want to measure that or not is a debate, but are we using the right approach by developing a one triangular approach of multiple measuring one relationship to see that this is what's happening versus maybe other things that are happening. So this is just, I guess, a reflections, but I'd like to, this is where it's going. It's not uber unique or whatever unique work relationship. Things are changing. And it might be also into multiple occupations within one person. And labor force survey is very limited of asking the main job and then a second job. But we might be dealing with multiple jobs and multiple occupations within one platform worker. So just a reflection for thoughts for further developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvain. This is, I can answer from our side because in our pilot, we didn't focus on the main job. We didn't focus not even on the second. I mean, that's the core LFS, and it was a part. In the module, we asked about any kind and how many digital platform employment tasks were executed. So this kind of triangular, there may be several triangular for the same provider. And I can tell you, we asked also how many platform have you used to work in the last 12 months, and the large majority, they said one. But a non-negligible number of people said 2, 3, and there was also 4 or more. So they were all non-negligible number. But let's say, if I well remember, it was 50% of people saying only one platform, plus another 25%, maximum 2.
I actually concur that I think it's important to concentrate on using more than one platform. I think it may be specific to occupations. I know rideshares often use more than one platform. They use both Uber and Lyft in the US. And then you get into questions, is that a multiple job or not? If I'm asking about the main platform for confirmation, do I want to ask about other platforms? And it gets into the concept if I use multiple platforms, am I a dependent employee or a dependent contractor?
Yeah, was just about to to say that, because I think from a measurement perspective, for example, the approach used by Eurostat would handle these cases because it is not linked upon the main job or the second job, and then it's not asked about, third, fourth job. It is in a sense, independent on the person's employment status, independent on all these factors, and then it kind of begins from the beginning asking about digital platforms. So I think that would be covered, but it touches on different conceptual issues. For example, the issue of dependent contractors. Well, are you a dependent contractor if you're using multiple digital platforms, for example? That can be discussed. It's also a question of how do we deal with jobs? Is it a single job in relation to each digital platform, or is it, well, if it's in the same occupation, same industry, you can actually have one job, multiple digital platforms, and so on and so forth. So it does provoke some questions around some fundamental issues for sure, which also very much require further discussions, I think.
Okay, I see that our time is almost up. I don't think we have time for another question, so I'll conclude by thanking the panelists very, very much for an excellent discussion. Thank you.
Okay, and now it's just time for the coffee break, and it's 30 minutes. Thank you.